Good evening and welcome to this special broadcast of ELN Local News. I'm Eric Halpern.
And I'm Michelle Alfini.
Tonight we're here in McKinnon Hall live with the coverage of the third Community Connections Forum of the year, co-sponsored by Elon University and the Burlington Times News.
We're broadcasting live on Channel 5, elonstudenttv.com, and ELN Radio on WSOE 89.3. The forum will focus on the current state of education in North Carolina and will feature speeches from invited guests, followed by a question and answer session with the audience.
And if you want to join the conversation, be sure to follow us on Twitter at Elon Local News. You can tweet using the hashtag EUTNEducation.
The debate tonight will cover public education in North Carolina. The topics include funding, vouchers, and Common Core standards. The 1.5 million students attend public schools in North Carolina. The government funds these schools along with revenue from the state lottery. Back in August, Governor Pat McCrory unveiled his education budget, calling it the largest in North Carolina history. But critics say the budget still doesn't address major flaws in the system.
School vouchers is another topic being discussed tonight. The vouchers give low-income children the chances to attend private school with taxpayer money. In February, a North Carolina Superior Court judge blocked the law allowing vouchers because of the financial burden it would cause for public schools.
Another debated topic in education is the implementation of the Common Core standards, requirements set by the Department of Education that every student must meet. 44 states, including North Carolina, have adopted the standards sponsored by the National Governors Association. Proponents say students will succeed in college or the workforce with the Common Core, while critics argue that standards lower the bar that many states have already set.
And now we are joined by Kevin Rogers, who teaches classes on public policy at Elon and currently serves as the Director of Policy for Action Institute North Carolina. Thanks for joining us tonight, Mr. Rogers.
Thanks for having me.
So you've experience advocating for education reform. What issues do you think are most important for North Carolina to address?
We have a lot of issues facing North Carolina public schools right now. I think first and foremost is the funding issue, adequacy of funding. We're very low, I believe 46 out of the entire nation as far as per pupil spending. And we've really slipped down the rankings over the past 10 or 20 years. So I think adequate funding, both per pupil wise and funding overall in the system, just the injection of cash that we need to continue building and investing in our schools for the future.
And where are some places we can see that additional funding come from?
There's all sorts of places funding can come from. Generally, we're going to be seeing, we would like to be seeing different revenue streams coming in through the tax base, through sales tax, all the different ways that the government does bring money in. A lot of the disagreement between the conservatives and the liberals right now in the General Assembly is how much is enough, how much is too much, and it's sort of that political dynamic that we're always playing with.
And how do you think vouchers will affect this?
Vouchers are another big deal. As you said, we had the court injunction just a few weeks ago against the voucher scheme. Vouchers are very contentious. It really is taking public money and giving it to private schools. And so I think we're going to see a lot of posturing around that this year. And what ultimately happens really will depend on the court challenge, I believe.
So we touched on one topic that's going to be addressed tonight. How about Common Core standards, and can you maybe talk a little bit about why those are controversial?
Sure. I think the Common Core standards came from a good place. It was an idea of getting all public school students throughout the country on a level playing field when it comes to math, science, reading. I think the real problem has been in the implementation of the standards. You have 44 states plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico now formally adopting them. But you're now seeing a lot of states and even some of the teachers' unions coming forward and saying, while we're behind the idea, we think the implementation needs a little bit more time. So it's been a highly politicized issue, and it's been overly politicized in my opinion. So I think the reality doesn't quite match up to the hype.
How do you think that implementation can be improved?
Well, I think that some states have done a very good job of preparing their teachers, preparing the administration, preparing their students for it. Others really just have procrastinated a little bit. So I think a little bit more time would be a reasonable way of going about it. I think the teachers, particularly the teachers' unions, are behind it, so that's really important as far as getting it implemented. But I think a little bit more time and a little bit more thoughtful analysis to really make sure it's implemented correctly would be very useful.
And what do you think the most important factors North Carolina citizens, parents, and students need to understand about public education here in North Carolina?
I think the public really needs to understand the way the public schools function. You know, most parents will experience public school through their own individual child and not through everyone's children. You know, and it's highly localized, it's highly individual, and policymakers are looking at this from a very high perspective, a very large perspective, trying to make decisions that are good for everyone, and parents are just trying to make decisions that are best for their child. So when they see these decisions sometimes coming out of Raleigh, they don't quite understand why these decisions are being made when it negatively impacts their child. But they need to be advocates, and they need to push for what they think is best for their child, and many times the school system can accommodate that if the parents push back and ask for what's due to them.
And what are you most interested in hearing tonight from the speakers?
I'm really interested in hearing just the divergence of views. I mean, the great thing about education policy in general is that there are so many ideas out there, and it's a very rich marketplace for ideas. So if we can strip away maybe some of the politics and maybe think a little bit more clearly about how these changes impact students and impact families, perhaps we can come to some reasonable conclusion between all of the overblown political rhetoric.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us tonight. I hope you enjoy the forum.
I will, thank you.
So, thank you for joining us. We'll be back with more coverage of the forum. Remember, you can join the discussion as well as listen to it on WSOE 89.3. Now we'll hear from Dr. Deborah Long, Interim Dean of the Elon School of Education.
Right. And now we're going to go live to Bree McClellan, who is here with a guest. Bree?
Thanks, Michelle and Eric. I'm here with senior Kyle Keith, who's an education major. So Kyle, tell me a little bit about what you're expecting to see tonight and what kind of interaction you're expecting with the crowd.
Yeah, well, my advisor is one of the panelists, Dr. Jeffrey Carpenter. He's with the School of Education. So I've really liked his classes and kind of the stuff that I've learned about education, particularly in North Carolina and teaching diverse learners. So really looking forward to his insights. Also, we just got some very interesting statistics from someone in the room is passing out some graphs and data and stuff, and so as an education major, some of it I find very shocking and interesting, and so I'm excited to see how they explain some of that. Yeah.
Is there anything specific that you plan on asking the discussion board, asking the panelists, any information that you yourself, especially as an education major going into this field, that you want to know?
It just seems like everything in North Carolina is not so good right now in terms of public education, so I'm kind of hoping for some optimism.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's about all we have. Back to Eric and Michelle live in the studio.
Thank you, Bree. So let's talk a little bit about tonight's panelists. The four members of tonight's panel represent a diverse group of opinions on education. Daryl Allison will be speaking first this evening. Allison is president of Parents for Educational Freedom in North Carolina. Following Allison is professor of education at Elon, Jeff Carpenter.
And then representing the Alamance-Burlington school system will be Dr. Superintendent Dr. Lily Cox. And then finally, we will hear from North Carolina legislator Dennis Rydell, who represents Elon and parts of the Burlington State House.
Tonight's moderator will be Assistant Dean of the Elon School of Communications, Dr. Ken Gaither. So, Michelle, what's some of the stuff that you're looking forward to in this forum tonight?
Well, I'm interested in hearing about the Common Core and how that has really affected education in North Carolina.
Yeah, and as you know, I mean, Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest took a pretty strong opinion against this Common Core standards over the summer, and then Superintendent June Atkinson came back supporting it. So I am interested to hear what the people here on the panel have to say about that tonight. What else do you think you're going to be interested tonight? What else are you looking forward to?
I'm interested in hearing them talk about funding, because I know that's a huge issue in North Carolina, and I really want to see how they seek to address that problem.
Okay, and now we are going to toss to the forum. That is Dr. Ken Gaither speaking now. Oh, apologies, we're going to start in about 5 minutes. Ken Gaither has just told us that now. And so, like we said, we're looking forward to what all the different panelists have here to say tonight. Michelle, you were talking about funding in particular. It is, I mean, really interesting to see how, you know, some states have done the education system well, and some states haven't done it so well, and why some are adopting the core standards, and why I think there's, you know, it's 44 states and the District of Columbia, so why haven't the rest? So Mr. Rogers, when he joined us, he was talking about implementation and how that's an issue, and how some states do it better than others. All right, sorry about all the difficulties tonight. We're going to toss to a break, and when we come back, like I said, we'll have the forum shortly.
Give up on sex, don't give up on birth control either. There are more methods than you think. Find yours at bedsider.org.
Get out to the forest.
Let the kids connect to their roots. It's gonna be so much fun. Yeah! Woo-hoo!
Hey guys, wait up!
And discover the wonders of nature with your family.
These trees are the key to our way of life.
Fresh air.
What a glorious morning!
Clean water.
Woohoo! This is great!
An endless forest adventure.
Let's rock this jungle!
Yo, this is untapped territory.
How amazing!
Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Hey everybody! Heart disease affects 1 in every 3 women in America, but you can fight back. There's no time to lose. Mothers, sisters, daughters, families, and friends, it's time to shout louder, stand stronger, and demand change. Let's go!
To the Batmobile. Dang it.
To the invisible jet!
Dang it.
Together, we can put an end to heart disease. It's time to go red for women. I could use your help. Yeah! Learn more from the American Heart Association at www.goredforwomen.org.
There's a shelter pet who wants to meet you. Meet one today. theshelterpetproject.org. Adopt.
Welcome back to ELN's live broadcast of this third forum, Community Connections Forum of the Year. Past forums included the issues of poverty and education. So these are things that I look for. Sorry, the current one is education. These are things that I look forward to every year. It fosters some really good discussion. What are you looking for? What's your favorite part about these, Michelle?
I really like the way that it connects the Elon community with the local community. And I think that's a really important thing to happen here.
Yeah, one of the parts that I like best about these things is, you know, students get to ask these different panelists questions, and that often fosters some really, really good discussion. So It's always interesting to see, how different students feel about these topics. Some of these students aren't even from North Carolina, but they still care about what's going on here in this state. So it's awesome to hear, to see that they're involved in the local community. I think it speaks highly of Elon.
Yes, and it really helps those people who aren't from North Carolina to really understand what it's like to be living here, because this is our home for the next 4 years.
Exactly. I mean, I'm from Massachusetts, so this helps a ton to understand North Carolina education. Lots of students are here right now. Smith Jackson just walked in. It's always cool to see how he's interacting with students, what he feels about these different topics. And so now, Interim Dean Deborah Long is introducing the panelists.
We've got our very important, exciting topic to talk about tonight. My name is Deborah Long. I'm Interim Dean for the School of Education, and I have been involved in education for more than 40 years, and so I'm very passionate about this topic and so glad to see so many of you who are also passionate about the quality of education for the young people in our community. I'm going to be very brief in my introduction. I told Ken I would be because we have a lot to talk about. I'm sure lots of questions. But Ken Gaither is going to be moderating the panel tonight, and he is an associate professor in the School of Communications and also associate dean in the School of Communications. So he has a long publication record, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to just turn this over to him and let him moderate the panel, and we're in for a wonderful discussion tonight. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Deborah. Well, good evening. I hope you join us this evening armed. Not with guns, that's been a subject of our previous community connections, but rather with questions. Welcome to the third and final Community Connections event this academic year, following on the heels of previous events which have focused on healthcare reform and poverty. Tonight's topic is funding for public education and education in North Carolina, specifically Alamance County. According to the most recent ELN poll, education is second only to the economy in terms of most important issues to Alamance County residents. When asked to grade the performance of the public school system in the county, only 10% of respondents gave an A, and most cited lack of resources as the bigger problem facing Alamance County's public schools. 59% believe the schools don't have enough resources, compared to 26% who believe schools don't do enough with the resources already in place. Only 1 in 4% of those polled listed schools as one of the best things about Alamance County, and 5% listed it among the worst attributes. This polling data tell us how a sample of our community views education. But there are also other statistics to frame the public education system in Alamance County. 2 weeks ago, ELN President Leo Lambert sent an email to ELN faculty and staff in support of the university's commitment to public education in Alamance County. In that email, the president noted that Alamance County spends $500 less per student than the North Carolina average, and our state ranks 45th in the nation in this category. Teacher pay in Alamance County is likewise well below the state average, where North Carolina ranks 46th nationally. Clearly, the issues at stake are great. So education is on our minds as a community, state, and nation, and it should be. Education is an issue that cuts across demographics and socioeconomic lines, with dimensions ranging from politics and policy to governance and accountability. We all agree education is important, but we can't agree on issues ranging from teacher pay to student performance to voucher programs and redistricting, to name a few. Tonight's discussion is intended to shed light on the dark corners of our public education system in North Carolina through civil dialogue and respectful discourse. We can expect disagreement, and perhaps we should even embrace it. but we should not veer from a decorum of respect for all the voices and opinions in this room. In turn, I quote the mission statement for the Community Connection series. It is the duty and privilege of Elon University and local community members to come together and discuss important issues in an open and respectful manner. The intention of this series is to bring together thought leaders in meaningful debate and dialogue. So before we hear from our distinguished panelists, thank you to the Community Connections Planning Committee and to our partners at the Burlington Times-News. We are fortunate as a community to have the Times-News as invested in our community as it is in reporting the news. Quickly, the ground rules for this evening. If you've attended previous Community Connections, we've slightly tweaked the format for tonight to allow more time for conversation. Each of our 4 panelists will begin with prepared comments, then we will move to pre-submitted questions directly from audience members, and then we'll have time for you and our audience to ask your questions. Our goal is to generate robust dialogue and multiple viewpoints about this crucial issue. So you should all have a card on your chair or seat. Please feel free through the course of the evening to write down your questions and raise your hand, and somebody will come and collect those questions, and those will be keyed in, and I will have access to those questions up here on my iPad. When I raise my hand, we will move to another topic or question. The need to open the floor to multiple voices means we will have to keep moving. This forum is not mine, nor is it those of our panelists. It's ours. Let's make our forum one that is lively and invites participation, regardless of where you stand on our education system in Alamance County and North Carolina. At the end of the forum, we'll post some more Elon poll results on education and have an informal get-together in the lobby with refreshments to keep the dialogue flowing, even if the spirits aren't. Also, some of Elon's teaching fellows will be prepared to meet you in the lobby, so please don't be shy to introduce yourself and maintain the conversation. I now turn to our distinguished panelists, each of whom will have approximately 4 minutes apiece to get us started. As they present, please feel free to keep those questions going, fill out those cards, raise your hand. Your questions are the lifeblood of our conversation this evening. So we will begin with State Representative Dennis Riddell of Alamance County, and then we will move to Lily Cox, Superintendent of the Alamance-Burlington School System, followed by Jeff Carpenter, Assistant Professor of Education at Elon, and we will finish with Daryl Allison, President of Parents for Educational Freedom. So, Dennis, let's get started.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Gaither. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and being here, taking time out of your schedule to join a conversation that's very important. You can see by the number of people that are here that education touches each one of us, some more severely and some more seriously than others, depending on our occupation and whether we have children in the school. But education is something that impacts every single person in Alamance County. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the committee that put this together. My name is Dennis Riddell, and it is my privilege to serve currently as the representative from the western side of Alamance County. That is District 64, which takes in Elon happily. And I would like to just set the stage a little bit before we get too deep into educational issues and share with you some of the fiscal realities that I ran up against when I got to Raleigh. Now, one of them that we must start out with is just admitting from the outset that our federal government is broke. Our federal government operates with a $17 trillion debt and an annual deficit of hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, how does that affect education here in Alamance County? Well, the reality is about 15% of funding in education in North Carolina comes from the federal government. There's no way that the federal government can sustain the path it's currently on. Something's going to have to be done to correct the deficit problem. When that happens, that 15% money that's been flowing to Alamance County, that spigot's going to start getting choked off. And we need to be prepared for that. We need to have a sound economy here in North Carolina and a budget that is streamlined and very efficient to be able to absorb that kind of drop-off in income. Now, in North Carolina, I want to share with you just a few of the budget realities and disconnect that met me when I came down to Raleigh a year ago to begin representing you. Unemployment insurance plan. Our unemployment insurance plan had a $2.6 billion debt that we owed the federal government. $2.6 billion. And what does that mean for us in North Carolina? It means $230 million in interest-only payments to service that debt. $230 million in interest-only payments we have made over the last 3 years to the federal government just to service the interest on that debt. That is $230 million that is not available for any other initiatives, education, transportation, HHS, whichever is your favorite. That's money that goes on a one-way trip from North Carolina to Washington, D.C. Medicaid. Well, where to begin with Medicaid? This year we had to come up with another $500 million this past year. Another $500 million in unexpected cost overruns in the Medicaid system. Now, we are in a partnership with the federal government in the administration of Medicaid here in North Carolina. We are the, that means we is $500 million has to be paid off to the Medicaid system. We don't get to say we've had a bad year. Can we do 28%? We have to do our 34%. $500 million, that's a lot of teacher assistants. That's about a 4% raise for every state employee in North Carolina. That money, $500 million, off the table, completely gone to Medicaid. State employee pension fund, $3 billion, underfunded right now. State employee health care plan, $30 billion underfunded right now. And then we have problems with our repairs and renovations in our buildings. We are hundreds of million dollars behind in that. I share these things with you, and there's more, unfortunately, but I share this with you to give you a snapshot of what your legislature was faced with at the beginning of last year. We did not have a lot of extra money to put anywhere. North Carolina had bills, big bills, and they had to be paid. So I thank you for being here. Looking forward to a good conversation and the question and answer period to follow. Thank you.
And before we move to Dr. Cox, we're also using Poll Everywhere, so you can see the prompts up on the screen. We invite you to participate and to text in your vote. And these questions mirror what was on the Elon poll. So, Dr. Cox, will you please follow?
Certainly. I also want to thank all of you for being here, Elon, Times News, and appreciate your support of public education. It's so good to see so many familiar faces this evening. This is very timely. As you know, we are in the budget building season with the public schools, so I want to share some information with you about our budget. This year we have over 22,600 students in Alamance Burlington schools. This is an increase of 400 students over last year, and we're projected to grow by at least another 100 students for next year. And that's very important to remember as we walk through the budget numbers. ABSS, Alamance Burlington Schools, we rank as the 16th largest district in North Carolina, and we sit among the 4 of the 10 largest school districts in North Carolina along the I-8540 corridor. Our budget forecasts for the 14-15 school year are still very preliminary. At this time, we do not have all of our numbers from the state or the federal level, and we are working on our budget numbers with our county commissioners at this time. Our current operating budget is at $180 million. 65% of that money comes from the state, 18% comes from the federal government. 18% from local funding and 10% from the federal government. The remaining 5% comes from other grants. 80% of our operating budget pays for salaries and benefits. Several years ago, we received federal stimulus money from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. These stimulus funds were critical in helping us not make further cuts to staffing positions. Since 2007, we have cut 207 staff positions from ABSS, with nearly 90% of those working directly with children in classrooms. The federal stimulus funding ended in September 30th of 2012, leaving a budget gap of $2.3 million, and we had to find those funds to fill that gap. Our district has remained determined To lessen the burden of these cuts, we've used our fund balance. It has decreased from $21 million in 2011 to $5.6 million this year. Our estimate is that by June 30th, it will be below $3 million. We have used $3.3 million of our fund balance to balance our current budget this year. So when I looked at the budget and as we were building it for the upcoming school year, I knew that I had to find $3.3 million that I did not have to reappropriate. So we're looking at using funds that are in Fund 8, or this is a special grant reserve fund. These are funds that are generated by our students, and they are not eligible to be given to our charter schools. They are generated through transcripts, through Medicaid, through E-rate, and other things that are generated only by the students in ABSS, and they are not tax-generated dollars. Some of the sources in this fund are pre-K, Medicaid reimbursements, indirect cost, and child nutrition. Raising teacher salaries continues to be a hot topic. As you know, we're hearing a lot of discussion about that across the state. While the national average teacher salary has risen by almost $16,000 in the last 15 years, North Carolina's average has only risen by $8,500 in that same time period. We currently rank 11th out of 12th in the average teacher compensation of the states in the Southeast United States. The governor has proposed a plan to raise base teacher pay to $35,000 and a 2% salary increase for all other staff, coupled with raising insurance costs and retirement costs. That will burden our district with another $4.3 million next year. We face other challenges ahead, partially funded mandates for Read to Achieve over the summer and summer school, and we are really working to improve our school system. We want to put more technology in place in our classrooms and are asking for additional funds. Much of this information can be found on our website, all of this budget presentation. I also encourage you to look on our website for information about our vision plan and strategic plan as we are working on a 3 to 5 year plan to have a better school system. Thank you.
And Dr. Jeff Carpenter, who is battling a cold.
I apologize if I sound a little weird. So if there's one thing that everyone on this panel can probably agree on, it's that our current system of school funding is inadequate. First, school funding comes from 3 main sources: local, state, and federal government. Nationally, nearly half of those funds come from local property taxes, which means this funding system generates large funding differences between wealthier and poorer communities. We have more than 15,000 school districts in the United States, and we basically have 15,000 different school funding systems. Funding differences in the United States generate huge disparities in the quality of school buildings, facilities, curriculum, equipment, teacher experience and qualifications, class sizes, presence of teacher assistants, and other resources. For example, ABSS spends about $8,000 per year per student, while Hyde County, North Carolina, spends about $17,500 per student per year. Same state, both public school districts, and Hyde County spending more than twice the amount of money that ABSS is. I've never been to Hyde County. Maybe the kids there are somehow worth more money than the kids in ABSS. The same kinds of discrepancies occur between states, with more than 3 times as much money being spent per student in the DC public schools as is spent in Utah. Because of such disparities in funding, too often the zip code you are born in plays a large part in determining the quality of the education you receive. This is not to say that funding and educational quality are the same thing, but surely such differences in funding produce some important differences in student learning, school experiences, and sense of belonging for students in their community. If funding didn't matter, why would some wealthy communities in North Carolina legislate extra taxes on top of their property tax revenues to add up to $2,000 extra per student per year to their budgets? Second, in addition to the funding inequalities that our current system creates, it is also a system where everyone can avoid taking full responsibility for school funding. The federal government can pass the buck to the states can pass the buck to the local government, and the local governments can claim that the feds and the state aren't doing enough. Each level of government can blame the others, and no one takes the ultimate responsibility for making sure students get what they need. So we have a system that creates huge inequalities and no one who is responsible for that fact. This has meant that some folks have taken to the courts to try and change the school funding system, But the fact that the education system in the United States is up to the states means that each of these court battles must be fought in each state. Shifting gears, I'd like to comment on one issue related to school funding that has received a great deal of attention recently in North Carolina, and that is teacher pay. Teachers in North Carolina are underpaid, period. Although some people argue that teachers get long summer breaks and supposedly only work 35 hours a week, this ignores the fact that almost all teachers work long hours beyond their contract obligations, and many dedicate their summers to taking courses to improve themselves as teachers, or perhaps work a second job to make up for their paltry salaries. But even if we ignore the debate over how hard teachers work or do not work for their money, it's hard to deny the fact that teachers in North Carolina are among the lowest paid in the country. And they are aware of that fact, and it sends a message. Although teachers don't go into teaching because they want to get wealthy, they do want to feel valued and respected in their communities. Given all of the new expectations placed upon them in recent years by federal and state mandates, it is particularly difficult to stomach a pay package that does not show them the respect they deserve. Now, one of the solutions that's been discussed for how to fix the pay situation is to have teachers competing against each other for a small number of bonuses. Not only is this problematic because it presumes only a small number of teachers are worthy of bonuses, but it is also harmful to students. What teacher is going to share lesson ideas and collaborate with colleagues if they think they're in competition with those colleagues for a few bonuses? I want my son's teachers working together to provide him the best education possible, not fighting against each other for a few scraps thrown in their general direction. I'd like to end with two quotes. The first one's from John Dewey, eminent education philosopher, who once said, "What the best and wisest parents want for his own child, that must be what the community wants for all its children." And Derek Bach, another esteemed educator, once said, "If you think education is expensive, you should see how costly ignorance is."
And Darrell Allison.
Thank you, Dr. Gaither. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Times News and Elon University, putting this together, Community Connections. And we're a statewide organization, Parents for Education Freedom, North Carolina, based in Raleigh, but we do travel the state, and it's so good to see, be able to come to a region, to a particular county, city, and see the kind of support you have around an important, very important issue. And so we're going to be talking, obviously, a lot about funding, and I guess we kind of come at it from a different perspective. Funding is very important, but, you know, in North Carolina, with the way we look at education, you know, there are three critical components, I believe, that makes for a good, strong system. No doubt about it, you have to have a public school system that is adequately funded. And I say that as a homer. I'm from North Carolina, born and raised, Kannapolis, North Carolina, and a K-12 product of public school. My oldest daughter's in the public school system, and so, you know, that's very important for me, very important for organization. So you got to have a strong funded public school system. You also have to pay, as the doctor here, Dr. Carpenter mentioned, we have to make sure that our teachers are adequately compensated. We have to treat it as a profession, not a job. And we have to put our money back to back our rhetoric. And so that's very important. But all too often when you have discussions and we're talking, the conversation kind of stops there. When we talk about the state of things and we say public education. But there's a third component that I think is very important to the overall system and how we're going to make sure that we have a healthy system that's going to make sure that we're educating and graduating great future leaders. And that is that we have to make sure that parents have more choice, parental school choice. And I say that the minute that you make that statement, people kind of rise up. But I always like to make an observation of the state of North Carolina, and this is the reality of North Carolina. We have 1.5 million children that are educated in our traditional public schools. And again, the conversation kind of stops there. But you have to continue in North Carolina that we have nearly 100,000 children that are educated in one of our more than 685 private schools. We're going to have 153 new public charter schools opening up their doors August of this year. And we're over 60,000 of those kids will be educated in our public charter schools, and that trend is growing. And we have nearly 90,000 children that are homeschooled in the state of North Carolina. So you have 1.5 million children that are educated in our traditional public schools, but ladies and gentlemen, we have nearly 250,000 children that are educated non-traditionally, and that trend is increasing. And to take it a step further, let's look here at Burlington Alamance. And I was looking at these numbers. You know, we have 23,000 children that are educated in our traditional public school, but we have nearly 2,300 children that are educated in our public charter schools. We have nearly 1,300 children that are educated in our private schools, and we're nearing 1,000 children that are homeschooled. And so even with that, about 5,000 students, you're looking at about 20% of the percentage of the makeup of our traditional public schools of children being educated. And so what that says to me is that for a lot of families, they believe in options. They understand that, you know, if I cannot find the education for my child that's going to work in a traditional public school system, I'm going to look non-traditionally. Now, the challenge I have with that is that when you look at the makeup of those children, those families that are taking advantage of those additional options, they're pretty much families that are upper middle class to wealthy. So when you look at Alamance, Burlington, Alamance County, and you say, how are the state of things for low-income children in the traditional public school systems? They're only proficient in reading and math at less than 26%. So you line up 1,000 low-income children in our traditional public school system, and a little bit of close to 750 of them failed to be proficient in math and reading. And so, yes, in order to make sure that we are making sure that we have a good, strong, vibrant K-12 education in our state, I think we have to adequately fund our system. We have to make sure we're compensating our teachers, but we also have to empower parents to be able to ultimately make a decision how best to educate their children, whether it be traditionally or non-traditionally. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. And a reminder, please fill out those cards. Please fill out your cards with your questions. Raise your hand. Somebody will collect the cards and take out the smart device of your choice, and please participate in our Poll Everywhere polls, which are up on both of the screens. We're going to begin with some pre-submitted questions that came to us beforehand, and we'll begin with Mr. Pete Glidewell. So, Mr. Glidewell, please.
Thank you. Is this on? Okay. With poor relative pay to other states, the elimination of tenure, the removal of incentive for a master's degree, the reduction of classroom supply budget, the promotion of alternative schools as the answer to underperforming schools, what do you say to the 15-year veteran teacher in the system to keep them in the North Carolina classroom?
Panelists, feel free to get us started. Who wants to get us rolling here?
I'll be happy to address that. Those are all concerns that we have. Public education, as you know, we've heard all the numbers here, and we do rank low. We have experienced cuts. One of the things that we know keeps our teachers in our classrooms is a feeling of empowerment and being treated as professionals. But we know that at the end of the day, they have to go home and be able to support their families. So these are very personal decisions that teachers have to make. I know that I went into education and have stayed in education because I love seeing the things that we do for children. However, it is becoming increasingly difficult to have a rationale to explain to a 15-year veteran that hasn't seen a raise in many years, who is now watching our beginning teachers that may have a salary very close to theirs. They're getting an increase, and our 15-year veterans are not. I spoke to a group of teachers today. We increased their salary supplement by 0.5% last year, and that was $10 a month. And I asked them how many of them spend more than $10 a month on their classrooms, and they all raised their hands. So we're at a point with resources where we're having to make decisions about, is it worthwhile to give them a raise, or should we use that money district-wide to purchase materials and supplies for our classrooms? So those are very difficult questions. We are working to empower our teachers and to treat them as professionals, to provide them with professional development, to give them a voice in their schools. We work with our school leaders to make sure that they know how to lead and how to implement, and that they listen to their teachers and they provide them with a process to be a part of the decision-making in their school. So a lot of these things get into dealing with morale and culture, which ties directly to strong leadership at the building level and at the district level. And those are the things that we can give that are not monetary, But we believe that those are also things that keep people wanting to work for us and wanting to work in our school system versus one of those that surround us, relationships.
I'd like to answer the master's pay portion of that. The master's supplement was dropped this last year, and one of the driving factors of that were a series of reports and studies that were circulating around the legislature. One in particular was called Sheepskin Effect and Student Achievement. And according to that document, there was no apparent correlation between someone getting a master's degree and increased student achievement in the classroom. Now, I have a master's degree in education, and I know for a fact what it did for me in the classroom when I taught, that it did make a difference. Now, here's the problem. What I laid out before for you of the fiscal constraints that the state is laboring under, it has driven the legislature to try to squeeze every possible efficiency and every penny from every dollar that we tax from you to the nth degree, because there is not a superabundance of money. The master supplement was something that fell to that process. Now, on the day we ended session last summer, I was on the floor of the House talking with some of my House colleagues regarding the master supplement and that we needed to reinstate it. And my colleague, Representative Steve Ross, and myself, we came up with a piece of legislation that we're going to introduce this summer that will guarantee the master supplement for another year until we can get back in session in 2015 and revisit the whole idea. I want to discourage oriented, creative, good teachers. So they're probably already at a good level of participation and performance in the classroom. That's going to be very hard to quantify and measure when they come back with the master's degree. All right. So that's the story of the master's degree. Now, in February, you had the governor, lieutenant governor, Speaker of the House, and the President Pro Tem of the Senate, all four together making an announcement about the beginning teachers' pay, boost in salary. And they also made an announcement that the master's supplement would be continued if a teacher had taken one class for a master's degree by July of last year. They would be grandfathered into the master's supplement program. And that is going to be put into place in the short session, along with the teachers, beginning teachers' salary supplement. So the master's supplement loss was a bad decision. That's all. And it's going to be corrected. And then in 2015, I hope we can revisit it and come to some terms about the master's supplement. About 35% of teachers in North Carolina have a master's degree or advanced degree. And that actually takes up about another $170 million in the budget to allow for that. $18.7 million to continue the master's supplement for one more year. Those are the actual numbers. So it's $18.7 million you're going to put towards teachers. It doesn't go to another place. You can't spend the same dollar twice, and that's part of the fiscal realities that we deal with in Raleigh. That's what's happening with master's supplement right now.
Okay, let's move to a question from Dr. Chris Davis. Dr. Davis, please.
Yeah, is the best public school in an area. Others, if they can afford it, will send their children to private schools or charter schools or homeschool. But the poor typically do not have most of these choices. My heart breaks over the lack of school choice in our county and nation, especially in the poorest neighborhoods. It seems inherent in public school administrations and teachers' unions to fight tooth and nail against parental choice when it comes to children's education. Be it homeschool, private school, charter school, or even allowing parents to choose the best public school for their children to attend, even if it's not in their neighborhood. Preventing choice strangles competition, the very element which inspires human nature to strive to excellence. Doesn't it seem this push by the public schools and teachers' unions to prevent choice is a way for fighting for what is best for themselves instead of fighting as advocates for the children they claim to serve?
Dr. Carpenter.
Yeah, so I'm for choice if all of the publicly funded options, there's some degree of regulation so that you don't have, for example, choice that would be publicly funded for a charter school in Wilmington. I'm not sure if it's a charter school, but a school in Wilmington that was going to turn down students because the parents of the student were gay. Okay, so that was something that the Opportunity Choice Scholarship, a school that was going to be able to use taxpayer funds and had that sort of policy. I'm not okay with totally unrestrained choice of where taxpayer funds go. And then one other comment that I'd like to make is that competition can at times bring out the best in people, but Wikipedia, there's problems with Wikipedia, but Wikipedia didn't come out of competition. It came out of people banding together for some bizarre reason and deciding they wanted to create this big repository of knowledge that was just going to benefit people, and they don't make money off it. It's not a competitive thing. So I think that there are cases in which we can pursue benefits not out of competitive reasons.
You know, it's very interesting. I'm going to make this this argument. You know, I love the free market discussion. Normally it's on panelists and experts, but that mom and daddy, when they're sitting at the kitchen table, trying to decide, given their income and given the school zone that they're zoned to because of their zip code, what is the best school for my child? They're not thinking about competition. They're not thinking about free market. They're thinking about what is the best school that's going to educate my child. They're not thinking about public charter. They're not thinking about traditional public, nor they're thinking about private. They're thinking about what is that school, regardless of the make and model, that's going to help me best educate my child. Now, I say that, and then I say this, that I think one of the most greatest things that our state has developed, and it's been in existence here for a few hundred years, is the public school system, educational system. It's phenomenal. You think about our forefathers, the thought of a child being in Burlington, Alamance, or Hyde counties, the doctor mentioned, that we're going to find a way to deliver education despite where they live and despite their income. We're going to try our best to deliver an education that's going to work for every child regardless of where they live. It's fascinating when you think about it, the vision that is. Now, I say all that to say the unintended consequence is in 21st century that unfortunately where you live and the amount of income your family makes plays a significant part in the quality education that your child is going to receive. You can be the most engaged parent. You can be, you can be there, but in large, but you've got a situation where the fact of where you live and your low income determines the lower the quality of that education that your child is going to get. And as I shared with you, we're at a 26.5% success rate for low-income children that are currently in the traditional public school system. That is unfair to me. The doctor mentioned kind of a private school that's on the fringe, right? Kind of abnormal. We all know, you all know of fine private schools that are here, right here in Alamance, Burlington. I dare ask you to raise your hand if your child, grandchild of your students here were educated in a private school. Elon University is a private school. We seem to not have an issue at the college and university level, or at pre-K, to be very honest with you. It's this tension point that we find here in K-12 that the fisticuffs kind of come out. And all we're asking, I guess, for our organization, all we say is that we just want to make sure that we have more quality, that we want to traditional private school or a public charter school for that low-income working class child. It's going to work best for him or her. we as a state need to get behind that because, again, the numbers kind of show that. Unfortunately, I think the numbers are more beneficial for upwardly mobile, financially affluent families in the state. And I just think that we need to take it at a piecemeal approach and really focus in on where we're having the biggest challenges and then open up some options or array of different options for that low-income child. I think when you put the focus there, all boats rise on the tide.
Please keep those questions coming in, and let's go now to Dale Steele.
Thank you. The question is on Common Core. I've understood the Common Core initiative began with a substantial amount of private funds which the North Carolina Department of Education agreed to accept and agreed to the terms of the offer. And then individual city county boards of education agreed to sign on and accept the terms in order to receive a proportion of the funds. I do not believe those events were part of a public hearing or local votes at all. It just seems that this is a nationalization of our schools, a loss of local authority and control, and a move to place local schools in the same category as our national health care. Where does Alamance County stand on this issue, and where will the funding come from for teacher training, textbooks, and other unknown expenses to make this work? Thank you.
I'll address that to Dr. Cox or Representative Riddell.
Okay. The Common Core standards are just that. They are a list of standards and expectations that we are striving for every single student. And this does tie into the previous question about choice and about options for students. And one thing we struggle with is making sure that we have high standards for every student while becoming a public school system that offers more options and opportunities for each individual child. Because while we pride ourselves in public education and saying that we do serve every child that comes onto our doorstep and we meet their needs, we know that it is very important to each and every parent that we serve their individual child. And we're having conversations in our school system right now about providing more options for students, about looking at issues of what zip code students live in and how well they're performing. And I encourage you to look at some of our schools that are showing the most growth per student, and they are some of our students with our schools with the most poverty. And that gets into issues of the opportunities our children have from birth to 4 years old and the funding that needs to go there. But back to your issue about the Common Core. The Common Core has been in place. Those standards have been in place now for 3 years. We've spent significant time internally working with our teachers. We've created core teachers that have led this initiative across our school system. We have 250 teachers that have looked at these standards, have broken down the standards and put them into operational terms for all the other teachers, and have gone back to their schools and led professional development in these new standards. There's still a lot to be done. The Common Core is very new, and North Carolina, when they adopted it, in order for us to receive those federal funds, we jumped in all the way. We dove into the deep end. We didn't take it a grade level at a time. We jumped in K-12, every subject area. So if you're an elementary school teacher and you teach math, science, social studies, reading, you got a new set of standards all in 1 year, and that learning curve is huge for our teachers. That's like showing up to almost a different job. We also know that the core standards ask our students to be able to think and do more things on a deeper level. So the standards are deeper than they are wide. So they focus on our students' ability to think, to analyze, to look at information, because we know that this day and age, information is cheap. We can all look up anything, any piece of information that we want on our iPhones, iPads at any given time. What we need to do is create a population of students that are able to think and analyze and determine if the information is useful or not, and to be able to solve problems and to be creative and to be entrepreneurs for our society. There are a lot of politics around the Common Core. We know that it came from the federal government, and there are a lot of people that feel strongly about it nationalizing one curriculum. And I urge people to take a look at the standards, to take a look at what they're asking students to be able to do. When I was in Raleigh and spoke on behalf of all 115 superintendents a few weeks ago about the standards, people are very passionate, and I'm very respectful of that. And a lot of people talked about how the standards are tied to certain novels or tied to certain curriculum, and those are the same novels and curriculum that were being taught 10 years ago with the standard course of study. Teachers have choices and they have options as to what they use to help students reach that bar with those standards. We are working locally to move our money to provide professional development and resources so that our teachers have new resources available. This is different from teaching from front to back in a textbook. They need more options. We're working to put more technology in the classrooms to assist with this as well.
One of the things I've been trying to work towards in Raleigh is more local control. I don't think our schools, certainly not ABSS, is well served by distant bureaucracies or agencies or consortiums that have their hands in education. And the Common Core standards have a very checkered history. Some of the major proponents of it and the people involved in it had no classroom time. And what it came about was race to the top, which I call race to the cash. Federal money with a few strings. And one of the strings was more rigorous standards to be accepted. Well, just so happened, guess what was available? Common Core. So if you accepted the Common Core standards, you got the federal race to the cash money. We bought a pig in a poke. The standards were not even completed when North Carolina voted to accept them and adopt them. They were not even finalized yet. Now, that's people in a hurry. And when you're dealing with standards, standards which contain curriculum and which drive the instruction in the classroom, it ought to be taken in a more deliberate and slow manner. We bought a pig in a poke. It was implemented hastily from DPI by, and this is interesting, nobody really wants to own Common Core. We ask around, who made the decision to do this? Was it the governor? Governor produced it, not me. Was it the legislature? Legislature says no, it was the state school board. You asked the state school board, and it was, well, the governor asked us to. And it's just a group of people pointing in a circle at each other. And nobody in their right mind is against standards, rigorous, challenging standards. But aren't we capable here in North Carolina of accepting and developing our own standards suitable to North Carolina? We could even borrow standards from another state. Massachusetts has some tremendous standards, especially in math. But with Common Core, we cannot do that. The Common Core standards are copyrighted. 85% of the standards have to be dealt with as they are. You can tinker with 15%. I'm concerned how that affects a teacher in the classroom. What of their creativity? What of their ability to innovate and to put their own personal mark on the lessons that they're instructing their children in? I'm not a big fan of Common Core. As I talk to teachers, it's almost 50-50. Half the teachers really like it, half the teachers really do not. The vast majority of parents hate it that I've talked to or have talked to me. So if we're just going to accept standards off the shelf, there's probably a whole department in the Department of Public Instruction that we can do away with. We won't need them anymore. Accepting standards is a very serious process. This was hastened along, and it's created a lot of problems in our schools in the implementation of it locally. And as Dr. Cox very capably pointed out, for teachers, this has been a huge jump. Now, the Common Core standards are just in 2 subject areas. In North Carolina currently, it's math and language arts. The rest of the subject areas are North Carolina essential standards, which are our own adopted standards. But more standards are coming. We need to decide what we want to do here in North Carolina. Do we want to be the masters of our curriculum, of our standards, of our testing? Or do we want to turn it over to a group of people who really had very little teacher input in the development of those standards? I think it is a dangerous step towards nationalization of education. If we want rigorous standards, we can get them. You look back in North Carolina's history of standards, every 5 years we're developing rigorous standards. These are the first ones that they claim are internationally benchmarked. But internationally benchmarked against what? See, I'm afraid we're going to lose control locally if we go full force into Common Core standards, and that's my reason for being so tepid about them.
We'll finish this question with Dr. Carpenter before we have to move ahead to another question. So Dr. Carpenter.
I'd like to make two comments. First of all, the Common Core standards were created by a consortium of state governors, so they do not come from the federal government. The federal government provided some financial incentives for states to sign up, and it came at a good time for advocates behind the Common Core. So some people signed up because the money was there. So probably it would have been a better thing if that money hadn't been there, and then the states who wanted to do it would have signed up and figured out whether they liked it or not. But people feel like because the federal money is involved, it's somehow tainted, but it was actually a state-initiated program. And I'm not sure about the notion that teachers were not involved in the creation of the standards. There were actually 2 cycles of receiving feedback from teachers. I was a high school teacher at Carborough High School in 2008 when I received an email asking for my feedback on the English language arts standards. I went to a website. I read through the standards draft at that point and provided feedback on the standards. So that was my experience as a teacher. I felt like I did provide feedback. So
did they incorporate them?
I mean, it didn't say edited by Jeff Carpenter.
Well, I mean, you know.
I mean, maybe it did. I don't know. My ideas.
Think about Representative Rondell. I'm just making sure that North Carolina owns it a little bit, but I'm listening.
I mean, that went out to the whole district. It didn't just come to me. It went out to every teacher in my district. So I think that Common Core has become so politicized that the conversation is no more about the actual curriculum or the standards. And so that the quality of the standards, I think, has gotten lost in the discussion of whether it's a federal imposition or not.
Let's move ahead to a question that comes directly from our audience that all of our panels have at least touched on, and that has to do with funding. And the question is, as an educator who taught in ABSS for 6 years, I reject the notion that lack of funding is an insurmountable challenge. I found the schools had solid funding, but the money was frequently used on resources that parents, teachers, and students would not have prioritized. What is being done and what can be done to ensure that these stakeholders have a say in how the money is spent? Dr. Cox?
Sure. And I take it, I'm reading the question again just to make sure I understand what's being asked. We have it up here on our iPads. So the schools had solid funding, but the money was used on resources that parents, teachers, and students would not have prioritized. Well, when we go through a budgeting process, a lot of the funding that is at the school level, we work with our principals to take that to their school improvement teams to help them make decisions at the school level as to how they use those resources in the building. And that is the process that our principals use. And they do try to get information and feedback from their teacher representatives that sit on those teams. Now that varies from the elementary, the middle, to the high school level. High school sometimes operates more with departments and other issues that they have. Then at the elementary level, they may be looking at certain grade levels, reading initiatives, math initiatives, and so forth. At the district level, we have faced so many cuts that we have not been able to go through the normal budgeting process where we get a lot of input that we went through. When I worked here the first time, I worked here as an assistant superintendent and for 3 years, and then I left for 2 and came back in 2011. And at that time, we were able to go to the schools and ask, what are your needs, what are your requests, and then we were able to prioritize those and take that information, take it to the school board as we were looking at not making cuts, but certainly trying to put our money in our budget where we were getting those requests. Since then, we've had significant budget cuts, and we've had to make those decisions basically in the reverse order. We have gone several times to our principals and said, look, we still have this much to cut. These are the areas that we have some options of where to make those cuts, and we've talked to them about which of these positions do you find to be the most useful and valuable as you're looking at student achievement across your school building. So those are all processes that we use to get information from our stakeholders that you mentioned, such as our parents, teachers, and students about the budget process.
Okay, we have a question over here. So,
the private school that we've chosen for our daughter has an even lower per student per year cost than the ASS. More money put into the system. How can we use the data and their performance, their success, to make a system like ABSS work better?
Let me just make a commercial message here off of that. I hope you've all got a copy of the information sheet that my wife passed out before this event. I just want to point you to this right now because it talks about funding here. The chart at the top, K-12 education state spending trend, this is something I put together myself. This isn't something that was handed to me by somebody at Fiscal Research or within the Republican caucus. I went and I gleaned through all of the previous budget numbers and information from DPI and Fiscal Research itself. And I want you just to take a look at the chart here, because when we're talking about funding, there's a few misunderstandings that are commonly out there right now amongst the general public. How many of you have heard of the terrible cuts that were made to education the past year? Okay. I heard a little bit about it. Okay. Most everybody has. But as you can see from this chart, the cuts that have occurred, and they were severe, were in 2008 and 9, 2009-10. Over $1.2 billion was cut from K-12 spending in 2008-9, 2009-10. Now, that was under Governor Perdue and a democratically controlled legislature. You can see that as the recession worsened, spending bottomed out. And then from 2010-11, it has been on the increase. 2011 and 12 is the first Republican budget. And you can see from 11-12, 12-13, 13-14, the lines have gone up. Whether it's the red line of Fiscal Research's numbers or the blue lines of DPI, you can see that the trend is upwards in spending. Far from making draconian cuts, we have been increasing spending. We've also got increasing costs. The money's not going that far, but we are not making actual cuts in the total amount of K-12 education spending in North Carolina. I put that out there just so you can see this. And these are the bare bones numbers, folks. These aren't things I've cooked. These aren't things that have been handed to me for a particular persuasive argument. These are the numbers from the budget conference reports. These are the numbers from DPI's highlights of public school spending that comes out every year. These are the numbers from our own Fiscal Research Department, which is a bipartisan group of fiscal research staff in the legislative building. And these are also the numbers from the budget, the continuation number, I should say, point that out. Continuation, you hear a lot about continuation budget from time to time. The continuation budget ideally is what you would spend if you wanted to maintain the same level of services, taking into account growth for inflation or population. That's a continuation budget. You're continuing everything the same, basically. That's the purple line on the sheet. You can see how it skyrocketed when the spending went down because it's out of sync with it. What I want to point out to you is that according to Fiscal Research, the continuation budget and our most recent budget are beginning to merge now. And you are getting to the point where you're at continuation budgets again. Continuation budget is kind of a budgeting tool, but honestly, nobody in our own homes or businesses, we don't do continuation budgets. You don't say, I spent this much last year, I'm going to spend this much plus next year. You say, what's my budget permit me to spend this year? It's like Dave Ramsey says, your budget determines your lifestyle, not vice versa. Thank you.
Mr. Allison.
Yeah, I want to, kind of preface my comments based on this prism. That is this, make no mistake about it. I mean, money and funding is critically important, particularly, when it comes to education. There's no getting around it. Adequate funding or the lack thereof it's critically important, but it cannot be the sole thing, and you can't live there. The young lady made a very powerful comment based on her personal experience, and here's the reality. Again, we just got to look at the facts. that I got this checked by Dr. Carpenter here, but it costs about $8,000 to educate a child here in our public school systems here in Burlington, Alamance. But the average median tuition for the nearly 10 private schools in this county is under $6,000. It's $5,900. And so you take it a step further and you look at the District of Columbia. Ladies and gentlemen, 15 years ago, it was horrendous in terms of the challenge that they were having there in educating the children in the District of Columbia. And funding was not the issue because when you look at the District of Columbia and it says the other 50 states and you say to yourself, who in the nation has the highest per pupil expenditure in the nation? It was the District of Columbia with over $18,000 per pupil. You want to answer the question, who was the lowest performing in the nation? The District of Columbia. And it was when the eureka moment happened with mostly Democrats, Democratic mayor, Democratic council that said, you know what, we need to look at some additional options. And so that's when you saw the opening of the Opportunity Scholarship Program, where you had 70% of low-income students failing to get their high school diploma. In the current situation now, 91% of them, as a result of the Opportunity Scholarship Program, a pathway where children are able to get a private education. Our president have their children in the private school. Mayor Fox, former mayor of Charlotte, who's the Secretary of Transportation, has his children in a private school. And so you begin to see performance in those children that chose that option begin to rise. And you also saw the increase of public charter school in the District of Columbia. Now, the District of Columbia, we're beginning to see a falling in the per pupil expenditure for the state, but you're actually starting to see the District of Columbia actually do the uptick in terms of quality and in terms of the child getting an adequate education. And so funding is critically important, but we cannot hang our hat and say the fact that we have more money going to a system, that's going to automatically mean that every single child, regardless but we also have to look and embrace the idea of non-traditional as well as traditional in our state. And I think only then, again, making sure that we have good funding for a public school system, adequately paid teachers, and allowing for parental school choice. And those schools, I would say, now sitting at the table and meeting with Dr. Cox and saying, what are you doing in your private school to where this parent here is really excited about paying tuition to send their child to a private school? What is that public charter school doing that I may be able to pick up on in order that they're reaching a population that heretofore we were not able to reach? And where can the public charter school and private school learn from Dr. Cox in terms of what they're doing? I think when we look at it from that standpoint, everybody wins. And until we get there, I'm afraid we're going to still have this kind of tension point and fisticuffs approach among adults as we talk about how we're going to educate our children.
As time becomes an issue, I'll ask our panelists to please strive for brevity and parsimony in their responses. So we have a question from over here.
Thank you, Mr. Allison, for the perfect segue into my question. I'm Paul Kuntz. I'm an attorney here in town. I have 3 kids in the public school system, and I've been participating in this vision plan stakeholders group for the last couple of years. And I appreciate the debate and the participation on funding and the philosophy of that. Can we get to a more practical answer about if you had one action item, assume you don't have unlimited funding, but if you had one action item that you could take that would improve educational outcomes in the classrooms, what would it be? And I'd like to hear from each one of you about that.
We want to start with Representative Riddell and work our way down.
I will be brief. Rebuild our families.
And I would say community engagement in our public schools.
Teacher learning needs to be a part of what schools are about. So teachers have to be continually learning how to do their job better.
I would say here locally, a commitment from Community Connections to maybe with the leadership of Dr. Cox to facilitate a gathering of school leaders successful school leaders in our public charter school, private school, as well as our traditional public school, and begin that dialogue and conversation. And I think there's when you begin to see some impact there and a positive, I think, in our classrooms, sharing of best practices.
Okay, I have a question that comes directly from our community. This is someone who's new to our community, who says, as someone new to this community who wants very Guilford and Orange counties appear to care more about quality education from the innovation and investment they make. What assurance do I have that choosing to put down roots in Alamance County is a wise investment in my kids' education? Dr. Cox.
Well, Guilford and Orange County do locally provide more funding for their public schools than Alamance Burlington schools. And that is a deep concern. But I would encourage you as a parent to invest in our schools and understand that I can't always control the funding, but I have a lot of influence on the innovation in our public schools. This is an exciting time for Alamance Burlington schools. You've heard from Mr. Koontz, who served on our vision planning team. I encourage you to go to our website and read the vision plan, because this is a statement from our community that was written by our community. We did not have, not a single word of that was written by a staff member or this public school board member about the expectations for Alamance Burlington schools. And they want us to be a world-class school system, and we're currently writing a strategic plan. And our first goal in our strategic plan touches on a lot of what we've heard tonight, which is how do we make our schools better? How do we make them competitive with surrounding communities, with private education? How do we provide what you need for your child, not just what every parent needs for every child? Trying to make an individual opportunity for every child. I often talk to people about, we don't want to be a Walmart. We want to be a series of boutiques. We want to open programs in schools that are interesting to children, that are challenging, that are rigorous, and we need the community's support to do that. It will mean that we have to think differently about what our public schools are, how they look, how they operate. Are children allowed to transfer across zones to go to programs that they feel would benefit their child? And so we're on the cusp of great things, and I think that along with those great things, we will need the funding and support, and the only way we can get that is by the community feeling the sense of urgency that we feel about public education.
Dr. Rosinski.
Around here, why when you were asked what one thing could be done to improve education, nobody mentioned raising taxes. So I think several of us are curious about that. And while money isn't everything, it certainly is relevant. I live in Elon, I work in Elon, I send my children to the elementary school, and I bring toilet paper to the school. We bring Band-Aids. We bring paper, markers, clothing, and I'm happy to do that. But we want to do more, and nobody even mentioned raising funds. And you can't expect teachers, excellent teachers, to stay when they're working 2 and 3 jobs, because I live here, and I go to the stores, and they're selling me shoes and clothing. That's an embarrassment. I think we should be embarrassed that we have to bring toilet paper to the schools, and those teachers have to work 2nd and 3rd and even 4th jobs. So what about raising taxes?
I believe that falls under community engagement. You know, community engagement is more than you in this room coming to hear us speak. It means the entire community of all age levels, of all involvements, whether you have students or children or not, understanding that a strong public education system gives back to the community in many ways, not just to the children currently sitting in schools, but to what they bring to our community economically, what they bring to our community, businesses, home sales, all of those things, and what they bring to us as citizens of the community that live here. And we certainly are concerned about our teachers' salaries. They deserve raises. They're not paid enough, and the time that they're spending doing extra jobs They're not working on what they need to be doing for your children. And so we're very concerned about that. They're also not spending the quality time with their own families and enjoying their lives and the quality of life that they all deserve.
The last time we took a vote in Alamance County about raising taxes for education was in 2012 with the ACC bond measure. And while the bond itself passed with overwhelming support to give a new industrial arts center, the mechanism to raise the sales tax was defeated. Now, if that seems like a contradictory proposal, it does. But that was the last voice Alamance County expressed collectively on the issue of raising taxes to do something good for education.
This question comes directly from our audience as well. And the question is, I visited schools in the largest slum in Kenya. It was in Nairobi. One teacher had about 40 students per class. The teachers had a blackboard and chalk. Students shared paper and pencils. Students I saw in K through 8 were fluent in 3 languages, tribal, English, and Kenyan. Students were doing math and science at our equivalent grade levels. These teachers were barely paid. What is the correlation between teacher pay and student performance?
So, I mean, speaking of competition, maybe being a good thing. So, how are you going to attract talented people to the profession if they can't pay their bills? So, teachers don't go into education for the money. They go into it because it's a calling and they want to make a difference in students' lives. But they need to be able to take care of their families, and they need to be able to talk to their fellow alumni who graduated from the same institution from them and not hang their head in shame because of the comparative salary that they have to peers who are the same number of years out from graduation. So, I mean, if you want talented teachers in the U.S., you're going to have to pay a wage that allows them to live as professionals. So, I mean, I taught in Honduras for a year in a classroom that had 3 walls and a chain link fence, okay? And I did not get paid very much, but I was also 24, and it was sort of an adventure for a year, and the cost of living was incredibly low, okay? But I wasn't going to do that for my whole life. So it seems to me it's a bit of an apple and orange comparison to the situation in Nairobi.
Okay, I'm going to conclude with a final question that I will ask for all of our panelists, and it's somewhat similar to a question we've already addressed, but it's phrased a little bit differently, and I think it's a good way to end. The question is, what is your most compelling idea, whether funding, policy, or program, that might represent a game changer for Alamance County K through 12? Mr. Allison, you're on the hot seat.
You want me to speak for Alamance County? I can't do that. I just challenge each of our individuals here that again, we talked about Kenya. The impact. I look at my 8-year-old daughter, my 4-year-old daughter. In the 70s, when I was in school, the reality of where you lived was going to be based upon what industry was there. That's when we left college. I'm going to Georgia. Why? Because there's industry, there's work there. Or Charlotte, Bank of America, Wachovia at the time. I'm looking at my 8-year-old and my 4-year-old, and it's a drastically different reality. That literally, my daughter may want to work at Wells Fargo, headquartered in Charlotte, Bank of America there in Charlotte. We may live in Charlotte, but there's a very good chance, 15, 20 years ago when she's employed, that kid in Kenya who doesn't have to step foot in America could take that job from my daughter who's 3 miles away from the Bank of America. And so what I'll say to Alamance and to our state, it's here. The urgency of now is here. We were competing amongst ourselves, state versus state, 20, 30 years ago. Well, guess what? That's not even in the ballpark. We're competing against third world countries where those children are outperforming our children. We're number one in confidence. We're number one in ego. But we're not showing that in terms of performance. And so I'm saying to us that we have to open up. We have to look at different ways, unique ways, make sure they're regulated, make sure they're qualified, but we have to open up the prism to make sure that if by chance this new idea can actually be innovative and work, let's not push that off to the side because this is not the normal way of doing business. Because my fear is unless we are making these strategic changes now, I beg to see the world that my child is going to have to deal with, because it is the international global economy that's before us now. I want to make sure that we're competing in Alamance as well as the other 99 counties. That's for sure.
We are out of time, but I'm going to ask each of our panelists briefly to continue with their game changers. So Dr. Carpenter, briefly, what is your game changer?
I don't think it's really about the funding. I think that so much of education reform, so much of the conversation is about stuff outside of the classroom. So funding is important. I think the game changer is shifting to the conversation more to what happens inside classrooms. How can we make that qualitatively different and better? And while we play around with all the stuff outside of the classroom, I think we'll only make minor changes and improvements to our education system. So we need to get inside the black box of the classroom and look at how do we make what happens there better for our students? How do we get our students learning more and our teachers teaching more effectively?
I want to thank you for those comments, because I often say that where the rubber meets the road is in the classroom, and we want the highest quality of teaching and learning to go on, and that is the most important thing that we do. On a larger scale, looking at this whole entire school system, I think a game changer would be to have a feeling of collective trust in public schools, and to believe that we do have a lot of the things that we need. We don't have all of the resources that we need, but you do have some wonderful people here. And I often tell many groups that I speak to that the school system is not an entity of its own. It's made up of individuals and people. And as those people change, it's a living organism that changes. And we need to be a community that stands behind the public schools, that speaks with your vote, you speak with your voice, you are involved. Have not yet reached the public schools. Alamance, Burlington, I often tell people the reason I came back was for the people. I came back to be in Alamance, Burlington, to be here, to work with this group of people. When I thought of the school system, I didn't just think of the school system, members of the board, or people that I had worked with in the schools, the staff. I thought about the community. I thought about the Partnership for Children. I thought about the Children's Oversight. I thought about Alamance Citizens for Education. I thought about our law enforcement. I thought about all of the higher ed here at Elon and ACC, and all of the opportunities. We already have so many partnerships in place. We just need the support to make that happen.
Representative Riddell, please follow the KISS principle. Keep it short.
How many of you have read the vision for Alamance County? Okay, it's online at the ABSS website. You really do need to read it. It's a good template for us going forward. From my legislative perspective, I will have to tell you that as long as the economy is sluggish and there is no new revenue, we are stuck in a Hunger Games type of competition for ever decreasing slices of the pie. Everybody wants a piece of the pie, but not everybody wants to work in the garden. What we need to do is to do things, tax cuts at the state level, regulatory reform, do the things we need to do, tight budgeting, so that our economy gets moving again. When the economy moves and grows, That will solve a lot of our funding issues because you will have more revenue. And the last year, we've had a 2.5% drop in unemployment. I mean, the best until that changes, we are going to have a stagnant piece of the pie. So from my perspective, enacting policies that help the economy grow, that get more people back to work. That increase in revenue creates a larger pie that you can then put towards initiatives where there has been want for so many years. So thank you, all of you, for being here and staying this long. I appreciate it very much. And thank you, Dr. Gaither and Times News, Elon College, everybody had a part of this. It's been a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
I want to apologize that we received some great questions. We couldn't get to all those questions, so my apologies. But I think the types of questions and the number of questions we received really show that we've hit a nerve here. And the themes running from budget and economics to accountability, factors dependent on where you live, where you were born, how much your parents make, choice and options, common care and politics, those all came to the forefront. And while it's great to have discussion, I think one of the takeaways from a forum like this is that we do have options. We have options whether we choose to look at community engagement, whether we choose to familiarize ourselves with a Common Core, and of course living in a democracy, how we vote, and looking at those politicians who have education top of mind as part of their governance. So thank you for joining us this evening. Please keep the conversation going outside. Join us for refreshments. And please join me in thanking once again our panelists for an exciting evening. Thank you, panelists.
Welcome back to Elon Local News' coverage of the Community Connection Education Forum. And thank you to those of you who've been listening in on the radio. We've heard some very interesting perspectives tonight. Eric, what did you find the most interesting?
Well, what was a common theme among all the panelists from beginning to end of the entire discussion was funding and the lack of funding. First, at like a nationwide level, you know, the economy is in a bad place, and that is the root problem, what they're saying for a lot of these educational problems, because the economy is bad, and so funding for the schools is bad. And so it was 3 out of the 4 panelists. The only panelist that didn't think funding was the main problem was Professor Jeff Carpenter right here from Elon, which I thought was interesting. He had a different perspective that we can maybe touch on, but what did you think was most interesting?
Well, I thought one of the most interesting things was what they were saying about the Common Core. It reminded me of what Mr. Rogers said in our interview earlier, where most of the problems with it weren't with the Common Core standards themselves, but with their implementation. As Representative Rodell was saying, it seems to have been implemented too hastily. There wasn't a lot of time for teachers and students to adjust.
Yeah, I think it was Dr. Cox that actually said that, you know, they took on this Common Core problem all at once, K through 12 at once, and that was an enormous learning curve for all their teachers. So I think what what you're trying to say, what they were saying is that if it was implemented a little better, maybe it could have gone smoother.
Yeah.
And going off of that, you know, Dr. Cox also had acknowledged that funding was a huge issue. You know, more funding can lead to better paid teachers, which goes back to what Professor Carpenter was saying in terms of that, you know, he hates that there's competition between teachers for bonuses right now because there's not enough funding. That's not what teachers should be focused on. And so, you know, with more funding, hopefully, they can all get bonuses, or more can get bonuses, so there's not that competition, because what he was saying is that teachers should be working together, not against each other, because working together is going to help the kids, not working against each other.
All right, now let's go see what Bree is doing. She's talking to Professor Eves, so Bree.
Thanks, Eric and Michelle. I'm here with Dr. Carrie Eves. So tell me a little bit how you think tonight went overall with the discussion within the community.
I think it was a great turnout. We had a really wonderful crowd, a lot of diverse opinions here. People were clearly very passionate about the issue, which is what we wanted to see. Obviously, we can't get to every question, but I think we did see that some questions really struck a nerve, which is good. It's an important topic, and we want to see that.
Absolutely. Do you think one of the panelists had anything specific that they said that you think really stuck out to you personally within the community based off of reactions we received? Any thoughts on that?
I think it all depended on sort of where you were coming from, right? We saw some parents who have students here in the Alamance-Burlington School District. We had parents who I thought we had a really poignant question from a parent of a student in private school, sort of wanting to know why those comparisons were different. I think those were really important questions to hear. Overall, it was just a great turnout, and I thought all the panelists contributed really well to the event.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Back to you, Eric and Michelle.
Thank you, Brianna and Professor Eves. That's all the time we have for this special ELN broadcast. Thank you for joining us.
For complete coverage of this panel, visit elonlocalnews.com and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.
We would like to thank Elon University and the Burlington Times News for having us here tonight. From all of us at Elon Local News, have a great night, Elon.